Okay, so I've quickly made up the push rods in the push rod bag, and basically what you end up with is 3 push rods which are the same length, and these are the ones that are going to go from the servos up to the swash plate, and then you have 2 push rods the same length, and these are the ones that go from the swash plate up to the upper mixer arms, and again those should be set to be the same length as one another. And it should only really be these 2 that, or only one of these 2 that should ever really be adjusted in order to track your blades. These 3 should be exactly the same length as one another and should never need adjustment, because any adjustment you need on your swash plate can be done within your transmitter. So I'm going to go ahead now and install these onto the machine. Okay, the first push rods to go onto the machine are these ones which go from the swash plate up to the upper mixer arm, and the manual does give a length for this inner distance here, so just the silver rod of 23mm. So I've set that on these, and we'll put those onto the machine, and there will be another length within the manual for the push rods that go from the swash plate up to the down to the servos. Those are the ones I've got here. I'm just looking in the manual here now, and it gives a length here of 9.5mm for the silver bit in the middle here. So I'll need to wind these in a bit because these are a little bit longer than 9.5mm at the moment. Okay, so there we have the push rods installed onto the rotor head. You can see one push rod here and the corresponding one the other side, and then lower down here we've got the push rod from the servo, and we've got our rear servo push rod as well, and obviously the one on the servo the other side as well here. So that's the push rods for the rotor head installed. So the next thing that we've got to do is sort out the motor and its pinion. So I'm going to drop the motor out next, and we can have a look at that and install the pinion onto it, and then put it back into the machine and set the gear mesh. Okay, so I've got the motor out of the machine here. So this is the BL430SP 3700 kV outrunner motor, but it's an outrunner inside a can. It's quite a stiff cogging motor, and we need to install the pinion onto this so that we can install that back into the machine and set the gear mesh. Now there's no flat on the shaft here either for the pinion grub screw to locate against, so one of the first jobs is to get a flat on that shaft in the right place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the pinion on there and tighten the grub screw down onto the shaft in order to get a height for the pinion, because when I tighten the grub screw down it will mark the shaft. Then I'll uninstall the motor, file a little flat where that mark is made by the grub screw, and then put the pinion back on and install it into the motor, into the frames. Okay, so I've now got a height for the pinion for it to mesh perfectly with the gear. If I see how close I can get here, I think that's probably as close as it'll allow me to get. But you can see here that basically the pinion is as high as it can go on the shaft to get a kind of a flushness with the end of the shaft. So that's kind of there's a kind of slight dimple there down to the top of the shaft, but very little, and that's the perfect height for the pinion to mesh nicely with the gear. So next thing to do is to tighten this grub screw to make a mark on the shaft, and then I'll file a little flat there, put the pinion back on and Loctite the grub screw in place. Okay, so there we have the motor installed, and turning the head now, you can hear it cogging, and it's turning. I'm not going to get this shot on the pinion in there, but you can just see the pinion turning there. And then there's a tiny little bit of backlash in the gears. Really tiny, weeny bit there. The gear itself is actually quite round on this model. I didn't find any particular high spots in it when I was checking to see where to set the mesh, because you want to set the mesh at the highest spot on the gear, and I didn't really find any spot on the gear that was particularly high, so it's quite a round gear, and there are no tight spots in the mesh all the way around, so this should run quite smoothly. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is put the gyro on the back, and find a position for the speed controller, and then I'm going to mount up the rear tail servo. Okay, so I've now got the GP750 aligned gyro mounted up the back here on the gyro plate, and if I just swing the model around, you can see I've just put the speed controller on in the side position and tuck the cables through the frames here, and just use a single cable tie to hold that onto the frames there. And that's, you know, reasonably secure and should stay in place. So the next job now is to get the DS520 tail servo mounted in this back position here, and get the push rod installed down to the tail. Okay, so what I've done is I've just taken the servo mount out of the back of the T-Rex 450, and I've got the DS520 here, and it's going to be much simpler to mount this into this mount with it outside of the frames, and once I've got this it mounted in there, we can just bolt this back into the frames. So I'm going to go ahead and install the servo horn and install this servo down into this servo mount. We'll take a look at what that looks like, and then we'll install it back into the frames. Okay, so here we have our DS520 with the servo horn installed, and it's bolted down into the frame, and this can now be installed into the back of the T-Rex 450 where it came from, and that's our tail servo installed and ready for hooking up to the tail push rod. So I'll go ahead and install that in the machine now. Okay, and there you can see I've mounted the bracket back into the machine, and we have our push rod here with the ball mounted on it, ready to be connected up to our tail push rod, which is actually the next thing to be installed. So with the tail push rod, you'll see we've got these guides on the boom that the tail push rod goes through. There's two of those, and you literally just thread it through those and connect it up to the tail servo. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, and here we have the tail push rod, and this is connected, you can see under there, onto the ball, and it travels down through the guide here, which is held on in the usual way with the tie wrap pushed underneath the push rod guide, and you come further back again, just behind the horizontal fin, another push rod guide held in place with the tie wrap, and then that goes back to your tail pitch slider all the way back here. Okay, so as you can see, we've got no tail blades on here, so the next job is to put some tail blades on there, and we also need to put some main blades on the head itself. So here we go, there's the head, and that needs some main blades on it, and then I've got to put a receiver in here and basically do a wiring job to connect up the wires, so that we're in a functional state and we can set up and fly the model. So next job is installing the main and tail blades.